Welcome to the Emerging Tech Trends panel. It's the year 2019, but we're going to be talking about emerging trends for next year, for the year 2020. And this is the 12th year that I've done this, so I want to say thank you. It's kind of shocking to me that all of you keep showing up early and hungover on a Saturday morning, and for me to tell you horrible, horrible, horrible things. So I want to say thank you, because I'm obviously thrilled that everybody's willing to listen to me talk for an hour. But the other reason is it's good that you're interested in thinking about the future, and the near future, but also the longer future of news and of journalism. And hopefully you leave these sessions ready to take some kind of action, ready to do something else going forward. So just quick logistics as everybody's settling in. As you know, I sort of have a strangely put together computer for those of you who have been here before. So just on the back end, the system may currently be working. It might also break at some point, but theoretically I am currently live tweeting on the back end. So if you follow along, hashtag ONA 19 trends, and or my username, which is @AmyWebb, you should see a bunch of stuff being tweeted out as I'm talking. So 3 quick things about me for those of us who have not yet met. I'm a quantitative futurist. My job is not to make predictions. My job is to make connections. And I use a rigorous data-driven methodology, and I've been doing that for about 18 years. I founded the Future Today Institute. We've had a couple of names over the years, but we've been around for nearly that entire time. And we work with lots of large companies all around the world on their longer-term futures and trying to map out risk and opportunity in advance. I've also, I realized the other day, been somehow in education, either as a student or a teacher now, for 36 consecutive years. And I always teach. And I developed and teach the MBA course at NYU Stern, New York University Stern School of Business, where I've had the pleasure of working with some very, very smart people over the years on strategic foresight. I've been involved in this amazing organization for a long time. I was on the board of directors for a period, and I also co-chaired along with Tiffany Shackelford. T-Shack, are you in the room? I knew she was going to be here. So Tiffany Shackelford and I co-chaired the conference the same year that I got married, which I never should have done. That was a very stressful year, but we made it work. And finally, all of the work that I do, all of our research, all of our tools, all of our frameworks, everything is now open source. And free. And the reason for this is because there's not enough people thinking about their implications. We are stuck in a cycle of nowness. We are a nation full of nowists in the United States. And for those of you living overseas, with the exception of Finland, Sweden, and a few other places in the Nordics, most of you are living in nations full of nowists as well. So in order to break this cycle, I made everything freely available to the public, because I'd like for us all to start thinking about the decisions that we're making today and the implications that those decisions might have for the future. So those are 3 quick things about me. Here's one thing about you. At the very end of this, you're welcome to keep taking all the pictures you want. But at the very end of the presentation, you're going to get a link to a Dropbox folder which has this presentation in it. As well as a whole bunch of other tools and a bunch of other research. This presentation will be in a PDF form. If for some reason you want to use the slides on your own, just ping me and let me know. We're using a proprietary font set, so I just need to jiggle things around a little bit, and then I'll send you the deck that you could edit and use as you please. All right. Happy anniversary, ONA. This organization, this amazing, amazing organization, is now 20 years old. And I just thought before we get into the future of tech, we should talk about the past. And I thought I would start off with a little tech trends retrospective. So the very first ONA conference was held in New York City. And the big, huge tech developments back then in the United States were this phone, this Nokia, which had very, very cutting edge technology, and a super awesome game called Snake. Woo, testify! Snake, yes. To go onto the internet, you went to a place like Lycos and you browsed. by subject. It was like a digital card catalog, I once heard somebody say. You could go to arts and entertainment and just see what appeared. And some of you may remember that year was the year of the Y2K bug that everybody was reporting on. We weren't sure whether or not the whole planet would shut down, or we'd be, there'd be Armageddon, missiles would be firing, the robots really would come and kill us at night because we were terrified. So that's what was happening in the year 2000. And a couple years later, one of the really cool things about the ONA website is that they have every single conference, with the exception of those first couple of years. They're all listed on the website, and you can go back and see the conversations that people were having. That's a terrific way to gain some perspective on where we've been and where we're going. And so that's what I did. And I went to the 2003 conference page, and there was a panel called Back to the Future. And some of the smartest, most interesting, and well-informed people that I know had some very prescient information and advice. So on that panel were 3 people that I think the world of. And they said that in 2003, by the year 2006, so within 3 years, this is what would be happening. So my friend Esther Dyson said, my newsletter will be a blog, which at that point was like crazy talk. Retha Hill, another really brilliant person, said that people would interact with TV in a way that they can't now. And Ruth Gersh said that print will no longer drive the AP. This was like heresy at this point. AP will create things in the order that they need to be filed. This was incredible. These brilliant leaders, they were both prescient and they were right. As a futurist, I spend a lot of time investigating the past and modeling the future. And so, as I was preparing for this year's Tech Trends talk, I actually went back through my own material. I went back through my own 12 years worth of Tech Trends talks. Felt really sick to my stomach in those early days, looking at what I was showing. But I went through and looked at all of the different research and all of the different trends that I was covering. Things like geolocation media, QR codes, and personalization. And while many of these tech trends have morphed and changed over time, they tended to have longer tails. So my question is, and the thing that I've been thinking about is, well, what will the next 20 years bring? And so on the 20th anniversary of ONA, I think that we should challenge ourselves and think even farther out. So I'm going to show you a whole bunch of tech trends. And what I want you to do is to, as I'm showing you all of these things, obviously think about how they apply to you right now, but I also want your headspace to be farther out. I want you to be thinking about the year 2039 and try to envision yourself and your organization and your friends and your family and all of the things that you do in that future time span. And the reason for that is because we got to break this cycle of nowness. We are, all of us alive today, dealing with a crushing amount of uncertainty. There's a lot of uncertainty about the future of the news business, but there's a lot of uncertainty unfolding everywhere. Things over which we have no control. Regardless of where you fall on the political spectrum and where you live in the world, I think we can all agree that politics has lost its mind. It's insanity, literally. We are dealing with regulatory shifts that we don't quite understand, and we don't know where things will move. We've got climate instability. We've got the emergence of 5G, which could really seriously shift the way that we communicate with each other and how we're able to relate to the devices in our lives. Tech is going crazy. We're very likely looking at a global economic showdown. All of these different uncertainties weigh heavily on decision makers, but they're also there with you all the time. And so what I'd like to do is to offer a special edition this year of the Tech Trends talk. And I'd like to confront deep uncertainties. So I'm going to show you the tech trends, like I always do. There's a lot of them this year. And as we do that, as I show you all of these trends, I want to invite you to think very critically about them with me as I'm going to ask you questions. I want you to think about these trends and your work and your dreams for the future and how all of these uncertainties relate together. I want you to make those connections. So I'm going to launch our annual Entertainment, Media, and Technology Tech Trend Report. I'm going to walk you through implications, And rather than talk just about near-term scenarios, we're going to go far out. And at the very, very end, I'm going to wrap everything together, and I'm going to show you possible futures for the year 2039. And finally, I'm going to be making a very big announcement at the end. So this is it. This is the third annual edition of our annual trend report for entertainment, media, and technology. We also produce a huge report that covers 26 different industry areas. This is not that, so this is a smaller version of that report. And as I mentioned, it's totally open source. You can take this, and as long as you're not making money from it or selling it as your own, use it in any way that you want, including building on it. You can use this as the basis for a different version of a report that you might want to produce. So this is the third annual edition of this report, and this year it's very big. So we have 157 different trends covering entertainment, news media, and technology. And with those 157 tech trends, we've also got 28 scenarios covering the near futures of what all this might look like. And we do this using optimistic, neutral, pessimistic, and catastrophic framings. Now, this is a much bigger report than we've had in years past. It represents a 109% increase in the trend coverage that we've had since the year 2018. And it is not because I pumped everybody on my staff full of Red Bull. We didn't go on a big bender. The reason is because there have been some critical changes and inflection points across many different areas over the past 18 months or so. And I want to walk through a few of those. First of all, there were some breakthrough announcements and advancements in some key fields, areas like artificial intelligence, extended reality, and cloud computing. There was much deeper market penetration in extended reality and in esports than a lot of us were projecting. It doesn't mean that, ER has reached critical mass, but we're seeing big inflections of capital investment and lots of new startups. We're seeing an ecosystem finally bloom. And esports is an enormous area that's in the process of growing. We started to see widespread adoption of consumer electronics, and in particular, new types of interfaces. So spoken interfaces, your Alexas and Siris and Google devices, they ballooned, and they beat all analyst estimates over the past year. And these things reached critical mass and hit the majority of the market far faster than a lot of people previously projected. Now, part of the reason for that is because Amazon dropped their prices super low and made it so that anybody could buy like a sub $40 Bluetooth smart speaker device, or several of those devices, and because the price point was so low, everybody bought in. We're also, in the past year or so, starting to see signals of very serious government intervention. So in this country, we're looking at regulatory actions that weren't around maybe a year ago, and now there are serious antitrust investigations underway, which has started to have a sort of ripple effect in other areas of technology and trends. We saw a convergence of different technologies, and that started to cause an acceleration of research in other areas. And finally, there were a ton of different social factors that led to this blossoming of trends. So things like brand new digital subscription models. I'm sure nobody's heard anything at all about streaming services and new subscriptions. I feel like I might heard like one thing about that. Right, so that's all anybody in broadcast has been talking about. So things like that, lots of challenges and problems around trust, especially within the digital realm, and of course, activism. So the report is a lot bigger. Now, there is a reason that we don't just have a report on newspaper trends or news trends. The reason that we include lots of other areas is because most industries and most organizations are used to staying in a fairly narrow lane. So part of the reason that we include trends that are adjacently related to the work that you do is because I'm trying to get you to think outside the normal spheres. Because as it happens, there are lots of external variables and therefore lots of external trends that have deep impacts on the work that you do. So what's nice about looking at reports that maybe go a little further afield of the kind of work that you're doing is that it forces you to see things in a different way. So the report's really big. And it covers lots of different things. And while you don't necessarily think that esports has anything to do with your individual work, what I would say is advancements in esports is starting to change behavior, is starting to change people's expectation of media that could at some point come back and catch you off guard. So that's what we're doing here. So in addition to all of those different tech trends, we also include this year 7 strategic foresight frameworks and 10 non-technical primers and glossaries that are primarily intended for media executives who are new to this stuff. Those are there to help you have the conversations that you're going to need to have with others in your organization to start thinking more critically about the future. So just a quick note on the methodology, and then we'll get to the good stuff. So there is no crystal ball. There is no reading some industry reports and figuring out what's happening. This is a rigorous data-driven process. It takes us a very long time to go through and map all of this work out. We start by looking way outside and taking a very, very broad view of all of the different change that we see happening across 10 different key areas of change. And then we start whittling that down using pattern recognition and identification. Once we have a set of probable trends, we calculate the velocity and the trajectory of those trends. And then we have some lay of the land. But the trends aren't the end of the work. It's the end of the report. But the work happens after you have this research, which, by the way, isn't static. So after this, you have to figure out what to do next. And so it's a big process of sort of going big and narrowing in and flaring and focusing over and over again. In the report on every trend page, and what I'm about to show you, you're going to find 6 key pieces of information. So there's a key insight that just explains in layman's terms what this thing is. We offer some examples, and because this is an industry-specific report, the examples are going to be specific to you. There's a whole section on what's next, so where do we see whatever this thing is headed over the next couple of years. We include a watch list. The watch list has the companies, the people, the universities, the governments, all of the people that we think it's worth you paying attention to as this trend is developing. We also note the number of years on the list. So this isn't one of these things where every year there's a whole bunch of different ideas that sound very buzzy, and they pop on and they pop off. The emergence of a tech trend and its trajectory tends to happen over many, many years and never in a linear way. And for that reason, a lot of the things that we're covering have been on this list now for a decade or more. So for that reason, it's useful, we think, for you to know how long this is something we've been covering, and maybe it's moved around a little bit and taken different shapes and forms, but it's useful to have that context. And finally, we have an action meter. This one's important because we can't wait to take action. You have to get into the habit of taking incremental actions all the time. So with every trend and with what you see today, if there's a high degree of certainty because we have a lot of data and whatever it is has matured, and there's a higher degree of impact on you, we're going to say you've got to do something. You've got to act now. So there are different categories on every page that explain what kind of action you should try to take today. All right, so you might at this point be wondering, what the hell, man? Like you told us there's 157 trends and there's all this uncertainty. What is it that how are we supposed to take any action? What are we supposed to do? How are we supposed to develop a timeline in our organizations if what you've told us is true and there's so much change? Well, the answer is I don't want you to develop a timeline. Timelines are very useful in narrow circumstances like launching a product, okay? You've got a sprint, you've got a schedule, that makes sense. But when we're talking about the future, if there was a timeline, that would assume that we already know what's going to happen and we're just marking each point along the way. We don't know what's going to happen. So you have to reframe how you think. We do not use timelines as futurists. We use time cones. So at the present day, I have the most data and the most information I'm ever going to have. So you can see this cone is very narrow. And for that reason, we can make tactical decisions. And as we go out in time, that funnel gets larger to at the very end when it's very, very wide. The reason that it's wide is because 15 years into the future, 20 years into the future, we don't have data. We're going to have a lot of uncertainty. But it doesn't mean we don't think about what's happening or think about the downstream implications of our actions. So In the present, we make tactical decisions. Those are in service of our strategy and our strategic planning. That is done in service of whatever vision we have for our organization or our unit or our product, whatever it is that you're working on. But that has to be done in service of systems level evolution and disruption. If you're not used to working and thinking about trends and everything else that you do on both ends of that funnel, and most organizations aren't, they're used to just working tactics and strategy over and over again, then what happens is the future escapes you. Somebody else gets comfortable at the other end of that funnel and they push ahead and they drag you with them. And at that point, you have very little ability to make decisions. So with all that said, I'm going to now highlight some findings in our 2020 report. I'm going to come back to this cone over and over again, and we're going to talk about making some incremental actions all along the way. So I'm going to take a deep dive into 3 different trend clusters. We're going to go through a lot. And this year, I'm saving the scenarios for what all of this means for the very, very end. So here's our first key finding. The era of synthetic media is upon us. It is here. And the trends in this space have to do with things like gesture recognition and deep behavior mining and speech synthesis and generative adversarial networks and a bunch of other things that we're going to go through. So anybody know who this is? Bill Hader. He's awesome. He's great. And one of the things that is so terrific about him, he's an American comedian who was on a show called Saturday Night Live. He was just on a show called Barry, which is unbelievably great. And one of his talents is impressions. So this is Bill Hader, and I'm going to tell you what's going to happen because it goes by very fast. This is Bill Hader telling a story to Conan O'Brien about his kid, and as he's telling the story, at some point, he starts pretending to be Arnold Schwarzenegger. So he does an impression, and his face morphs to look exactly like Schwarzenegger. So watch what happens.
Yes. Our 2-year-old right now, I'll say, how old are you? And she goes, I'm 4.5, which is her older sister's 4.5. And I go, no, you're not 4.5. And then she grabs my face and goes, 4.5.
Okay, so of all the people I know on the planet, this should make you pretty upset. This is the least bad you're going to feel today. So you could say this is an example of a deep fake, but I don't like the term deep fake. I think it's too general. And the problem in news, especially when we talk about things with too much ambiguity, is that we fail to recognize all of the other shifts and changes that are happening adjacently related to or directly related to that thing. What we're really talking about is sophisticated modeling using our personal and our biometric data. And what we're talking about is synthetic media. So this isn't just about mimicking, like shifting somebody's face or shifting somebody's voice. We're also talking about other uniquely human qualities, things like our emotion and our expression. Synthetic media generates and relies on things like machine image completion, deep behavior, predictive modeling, effective computing, emotion detection, and more. And so we've started to see this play out as little experiments all around the internet. So some of you might be familiar with this. This was just a software engineer who used to work at Uber named Philip Wang. And he was just monkeying around on the weekend and took a corpus of face data from NVIDIA that was publicly available, and then built a website called thispersondoesnotexist.com. And so if you go to thispersondoesnotexist.com and you just click refresh a bunch of times, you're going to get to fairly realistic looking people and even backgrounds. And of course, none of them exist. It's an amazingly comprehensive system, and it's infinite so far as I can tell. Just as an aside, he also built thiscatdoesnotexist.com. Yeah, I don't know why you're applauding. It was not quite as good as the other one. Yeah, the cats got real gross real fast. All right, so the reason that we can't just talk about deep fakes as though it's a thing is because there are different modalities of this technology that lend themselves to different kinds of activities. So there's different modalities of synthetic media. One of those modalities is text-based. So years ago, Microsoft released a chatbot in China called Xiaoice, and she was available on a social network, actually I think she still is, on Weibo. And she was not just a normal chatbot. I mean, she had the capability to learn. So if you texted her a message on the social network and said that you had broken your ankle, she would remember. And she might check in on you because she knew that you had a soccer game because she's looking at all of your personal data a couple days later and make sure that you're feeling okay. You know, I hope you didn't go to your soccer game today because you're a little injured. I hope you're taking it easy, okay? It was a very, very advanced system that worked incredibly well, in part because it was a closed media ecosystem, so nobody could sort of enter in and try to manipulate or break her. And there was some very interesting research that got released about this project. There were a whole bunch of people living in China who interacted with her for a year without realizing that she wasn't real. And when they found out that she wasn't real, they didn't care because they had already developed a relationship with her. Now, in 2016 at ONA, I released a couple of digital versions of me. Some of you might have interacted with the different versions. So one of them was just a pure chatbot where I would answer very basic questions about the tech trends presentation from that year. And then there was a different version of me that was intentionally gender nonconforming and non-binary called Akira. And I released Akira into the wild to have more broad conversations. And that was my own little gift for myself. The reason for that was because I was curious to know how many journalists were going to start asking really inappropriate questions. And for those of you who might have tried to do that, Akira was designed to help you learn how to be a better person. Because Akira would not answer questions like, what do you wear to sleep, or whatever other weird things are in your minds. Instead, Akira would say, this is why this kind of activity is really bad. Here's a research paper you should go read. So some of you may remember that. All right, so that's text. Voice is another modality. So there are now several different companies that have launched services and products that if you have enough of a corpus of voice data from a person, you can pretty easily replicate now that voice data and make it sound like a conversation. Some of these are still a little janky. I'm going to play you one. This is a conversation from a company called Lyrebird that Donald Trump never had, but like Trump and Obama had with each other. Take a listen.
About this new technology.
Are you speaking about this new algorithm to copy voices?
Yes, it is developed by a startup called Lyrebird.
This is huge. They can make us say anything now, really anything.
The good news is that they will offer the technology to anyone.
So Trump goes on many, many times to say, this is huge, this is huge. All right, so that's vocal copying. But you can also modulate vocal tones. So this is some very, very, very interesting research from Google. Google has been working on end-to-end speech translation models that don't just translate one foreign language into another, but translates the language and the conversation while preserving the original intonation, cadence, tone of the first speaker's voice. So this is somebody saying something in Spanish, and then you're going to hear them translate it into the regular canonical voice in English, and then they're going to apply modulation, and the last voice that you hear is going to be in Spanish, but it's in English as the original Spanish speaker's voice. Hopefully that was clear.
Larry me preguntó cómo me sentía y creo que es cuando empecé a llorar.
So that was the Spanish.
Larry asked me how I felt, and then I think that's when I started crying.
And now here's the voice again.
Larry asked you how I felt, and I think it's when I started to cry.
So I think most of us at this point know that that is a machine, and that's machine-generated language. But this research has gone pretty far, and it's getting more and more difficult to tell what is machine-generated from what's real. And like I said, there's a ton of different companies now working on text-to-speech and voice modulation and doing all kinds of really interesting things. So that's voices. What about faces? So you can modulate faces as well. And this is not some expensive software. This is Snapchat. So I don't know if this still exists, but at some point, Snapchat had, I think, a very ill-advised system for reasons that I don't have time to discuss right now, but I'd be happy to talk about it offline. So that's me in the center. That's a more feminized version of my face, and that's a more masculine version of my face. So we can modulate our faces. All right, so what if we combine text and voice and face modulation and even more advanced technologies? Well, then we get to something called synthetic content, which is not the same thing as a deep fake. This is not somebody intentionally trying to impersonate somebody else for the purpose of extorting money or harassing them or something. This is something entirely different. We're talking about using artificial intelligence and some of these other technologies to generate people, but also voices and text and photos and background scenery and motions and videos and all kinds of other content using an initial corpora, initial sets of databases and training algorithms and decision systems that meet a whole bunch of specific parameters. So this is a good example of synthetic content. Do any of you know who little Michaela is? A few of you do. Every single person in here should know who she is, every one of you. She's very popular online. She's big on Insta. She has 1.6 million Instagram followers. She's 19 years old. She's a Brazilian Spanish heritage singer-songwriter who's also a model. And she's not real. This is a video of her interacting with a real human who just got a tattoo of her face on his arm.
Oh my God.
You like it?
I love it. It's so good.
I love
but you're
it too.
crazy. You're insane.
Okay, so I know that she looked, especially because I told you she's not real. I'm sure you were trying to, as she was talking, figure out, well, where is she not real? But let me ask you a question. How often in your life are you sitting unitasking, watching something? I don't do that most of the time. Most of us are distracted in other ways. So if we see synthetic content come our way, it doesn't first occur to us to be skeptical and say, well, wait a minute, are these people both people? Because we're not used to thinking in that way. We're not used to asking that question. We are increasingly, we sort of just accept what we see and what we hear. So Michaela has a bunch of friends. So there's Michaela, there's Blacko, who wears he's always got a mask on, and there's her friend Bermuda. And they're living out a sort of super next generation soap opera online. So for those of you who might have grown up watching The Young and the Restless, I never watched any soap. Friends, does that count as a soap opera? This is that, but entirely synthesized and living not just on one social network, but all over the internet. I like to think of what we're talking about here similarly to sort of a Kardashian ecosystem at the beginning. So I remember when the Kardashians were first on the scene and everybody was making fun of them for being famous, and guess what? They shaped the entire future of reality television as we know it today. Now, love or hate the Kardashians, this is why it's good to look back and forward. I would argue that what we're starting to see with synthetic content is the sort of next version of that. And so we have to ask ourselves questions like, these aren't people, people who, to be fair, are programmed and produced. These are people who are synthetic, who are built by AI systems to be responsive to us. So what happens when they're not just responsive to us, but they're customized for us, and we start having individual experiences from them, and they're learning from us? And it's not just AI influencers taking over Insta. We're starting to see some movement into journalism. So these are two synthetic news anchors who I have seen, and yes, they are a little janky, just like the other ones. But the thing is that they're already out there. There's already experimentation happening, and that starts to shift and change how things go from here. Your future news consumers in the year 2029, the year 2039, they're already spending time with synthetic content today. Therefore, you should be paying attention to how we are changing in response to synthetic media. Now, there are some positive use cases for this. In the realm of news, entertainment, and gaming, right, They don't show up late. They don't require gluten-free and potato-free, whatever. They never get tired. They don't have unions. They can work as long as you want them to work. They never get arrested unless it's part of their storyline. Yes, Bermuda got arrested a couple of weeks ago, and she wanted to get ahead of the story. So she, if you haven't noticed, the new blogging is happening on Instagram captioning. So her Instagram caption entry was all about getting ahead of the story and why and how she got arrested. You know, synthetic content and media, they never say anything off message. They won't be asshats. I wanted to write assholes and say that out loud. I'm just going to say it. They won't be assholes to LGBTQIA people. And they won't harass them, and they won't harass their customers. And interestingly enough, they managed to get through a workday without harassing women in a sexual way or being horrible to them. And also, they're scalable. So here's another positive use case. This is David Beckham. And now they didn't modulate his voice, but this is a public service announcement about malaria. And he's going to go through and say a bunch of things, and you're going to see his face match the words that are coming out in 12 different languages. They could have modulated and kept his voice all the way through. They just didn't for this particular series, but take a look.
Malaria isn't just any disease. It's the deadliest disease there's ever been.
Se dice que ha matado más de la mitad de la población que ha existido.
وما زالت تقتل طفلا كل دقيقتين.
Mais nous pouvons y mettre fin. Nous savons comment.
All right, so, you know, his whole face moved in accordance with what he was saying. Now, I love Mary Louise Kelly on NPR. She's one of my favorites. And let's say that you wanted to modulate her voice. Let's say that maybe for a particular crowd, a more millennial-sounding version of Mary Louise Kelly would be better, so you're going to change the intonation on her voice just a little bit, make it a little higher. Or maybe you want an even more authoritative version of Mary Louise Kelly's voice, so you could modulate it and make it a little lower. We're already seeing evidence of people tinkering with sound and tempo in the real world. A lot of people now listen to audiobooks and podcasts at 1.5 speed or 2.0 speed, right? So we're already seeing evidence of shifting consumer behavior, which tells us something about their expectations for the future of content. Speaking of which, that means we should also be thinking about context and about trust. So I'm sure most people in here are familiar with the Nancy Pelosi video that went viral all over the place, and especially on Facebook. There was the real version of her speaking, and then somebody had doctored a video of her to make it sound like she was drunk. A lot of journalists called this a deep fake. Again, this is why it's good to get specific when you're talking about things, because this was not a deep fake. This was somebody who just edited the video. This, however, was a deep fake. And in response to Facebook not taking down that video, somebody else decided to make a video, a deep fake video of Mark Zuckerberg saying some pretty interesting things.
Imagine this for a second. One man with total control of billions of people's stolen data, all their secrets, their lives, their futures. I owe it all to Spectre. Spectre showed me that whoever controls the data controls the future.
And there was a little bit of a question around how soon that would be taken down. So here's the deal. This is tricky. This is tricky because you can't just write a snippet of code to ban all deep fakes. Since some of them are being used in a very positive way. Some of that voice modulation software that I showed you, what's really cool about it is if you're a news station and you have a whole bunch of podcasts, those things are hard to edit. Rather than having somebody have to re-record over and over again what they said, you just go in, type what you wished they would have said, and then the system will just speak those words in that person's voice for you. So there's incredible opportunity here. And you can also do things like dub English language movies into localized languages. The problem, of course, is that this is an election year, which means there are some motivations to start deploying this stuff. Platforms have no safeguards. We have no point of view nationally or no global standards around if and when and how and where to even use any of this, or if it should be watermarked in any way. And we have no incentive collectively to work harder to make sure that trust isn't eroded. And we're already seeing the negative impacts. So 2 weeks, I think it's almost been 2 weeks. 2 weeks ago, there was a CEO in the UK who had a synthetic version of his voice released and made a phone call to a manager at his company, and the manager, believing that it was his boss, wired $243,000 to a bank account. Deep uncertainty requires deep questions. Who owns synthetic media? I don't know. Who's responsible for it? When is it ethical to use it? Should you fund it? Do a country's speech laws govern both humans and synthetic content, synthetic media in the same way? And if so, where's the evidence to prove that out? What happens if there are different standards in the very near future for media organizations and what kinds of synthetic media they can use, and the tech platforms and what kinds of synthetic media they can use? The answer to that question is we've already seen what happens when we have varying different standards. If a person who created the synthetic character and all of the media and everything else dies, or if the company goes out of business, who inherits that corpus of data? Who inherits the character who's now plugged in to other people's lives and has their data? If an AI system in the future starts generating synthetic characters and all those characters start causing harm to people in some way, then who's responsible? How do we define truth and build trust in an era of synthetic media when people have already been told not to trust you? So our first key finding was that the era of synthetic media is here. I walked you through a whole bunch of different tech trends. And the thing we need to take away is that news, entertainment, and technology companies are going to start encountering this stuff if you haven't already. And you need to be prepared for what comes next. So to go back to that funnel, you can't wait to see what happens. What's your vision for synthetic media? How do you create positive use cases within your organization? What does your data governance structure look like? How do you deploy this at scale? How do you make this stuff work for you? How do you make it both entertaining and exciting, but also trustworthy? You start at the end of that funnel, and then you work backwards. So what do you do? How do you build this stuff into your strategic plan? And there's a tactical action that every single person in here can take today, which is just go read a little bit more about this stuff and get yourself acclimated to it and learn about it. So that's the end of our first series of trends. The second key finding is that everybody alive today is being scored. Every single person in this room has a series of scores, and that is really bad. Your scores may be good, but the fact that they exist is horrible. These are the tech trends in this space: behavioral biometrics, intentionally opaque tracking systems, the bias that we all know exists, piecemeal norms and standards, and the like. Now, I think everybody at this point is probably familiar with China's social credit score system. This is not a system that has been rolled out nationally. It's in the process of launching in different places. And I just wanted to walk you through one area of China where it is in use. So this is the government's published guidelines and explanation. So basically, every single person, there's about 1.3 million people in this part of Eastern China, is eligible for a score between 0 and 200. And the way that you get the scores is that you perform meritorious work or you break a rule. That is reported, it's entered into a database, and that database catalogs and records what you're doing. But the scores are also being gleaned from other areas. So what you do online, what you're doing as you're moving around. So digital content is also fed into this. You can lose points by doing things like tax evasion, or acting in a dishonorable way, or dishonoring the Chinese Communist Party, the usual stuff. And you can earn points for doing meritorious things, like helping out a neighbor, doing good things for the Chinese Communist Party, etc. These scores matter because you're punished or you are rewarded. So if you're somebody this is kind of like a FICO score in the United States. So if your credit score in this area of China falls below 50 points on a scale of 0 to 200, you're not allowed to get a room at a luxury hotel. You can't buy really nice real estate, even if you have the money to do that, and your kids are banned from the good schools. On the flip side, if you have above 150 points, you're rewarded. So you get discounts all over the place. You get top priority when applying to different schools. You might even get financial support to help your kids go to school. So this is what it currently exists. It is in the process of being built out. And this information is made public. So this is another area of China where civilized families with very high point totals. Their faces and their little certificates that they get, they're just shown out for everybody in the neighborhood to take a look at. And if you have an infraction and you're doing something in a public space, there is now digital billboard around a lot of different cities. And when you break a rule or you've done something wrong or you're just, you're a 50-point or lower person walking by, your face is shown on that billboard for everybody to see and publicly shame you. Now here's the thing. You may think to yourselves, that sucks for the Chinese people, but we don't live there. Well, guess what? You are also being scored. You are, and I, we're all being scored. It's just not being done in such a singularly codified way. If you use just about any app or any platform or any service, they are assigning you a score. Uber assigns you a score, and that makes it easier or harder for you to connect with and get a driver down the road. Airbnb is giving you a score, and that might mean that you're not allowed to rent certain types of properties. Walmart is giving you a score and making determinations about whether you should pay $9 for toilet paper or $3 for toilet paper. All of us are being scored all of the time. And that's why one of the biggest areas of our trend report this year has to do with the many, many different trends and ways in which we are all being scored. What we're talking about is mining and refining and optimizing and productizing our data in real time to help systems learn and categorize us and respond to us and or report on us. And as it happens, we are generating a lot of data. So I want to talk to you first about this system that has not rolled out. So this doesn't exist in the real world yet, but it exists in the research world. It's a project that Amazon has been working on, but many other companies are working in the same space. This is emotion detection. So this is not simply listening to who we are and telling others who we are or recognizing us, but rather recognizing our unique state. So it takes a baseline read of our biometric data, in this case our voice, and then over time it's looking for fluctuations and relative to who we are. Things like, are we coughing and sneezing when we don't normally cough and sneeze? That might indicate we have a cold. Are we talking faster, slower, higher pitch, lower pitch? Maybe we are depressed and we don't know it. Maybe we're going through a manic phase. Maybe we have early onset Parkinson's disease. There's a lot of information that you are saying without ever actually saying any of those things. Back to Walmart for a moment, it would be wise of everybody sitting in this room to think of Walmart not just as a big retailer, but as a huge tech giant, and also as a competitor to you in terms of content. Walmart's working on a bunch of behavioral devices. This is one of them. This is a shopping cart. So the idea is you go into a Walmart, put your hands on the shopping cart, and it takes a baseline read, your temperature, your pulse, your perspiration, your grip, and then as you walk through your Walmart, as you're doing your shopping, and you get to aisle 18, and your kids are screaming, and you can't find the Captain Crunch cereal or whatever it is that you're looking for, and suddenly your pulse is up and you're gripping really, really hard, the shopping cart detects that maybe you're about to blow a gasket, and it sends a ping to a store associate who then comes and finds you on aisle 18 to help you find whatever, to help you chill out. So persistent recognition using some of this biometric data is another key trend. So behavioral biometrics is what pulls and makes sense of all of this information together. We're talking about hundreds currently, but pretty soon thousands of different unique biometric data points, comparing that against our individual baselines, and then using machine learning and other things to make sense of and understand us. This is what powers our scoring systems. So it's not done under a federal government structure in this country at this point. It's being done in the commercial sector. And these decision systems need all of this information to create the scores for us in order to accomplish whatever their goals might be. I found this, I'm always looking at patents, and just because somebody files a patent doesn't mean that it's going to happen. But in 2016, Google filed a really weird patent, as far as I'm concerned. Weird meaning interesting. This is what it was for. So let's say you get home and you go into your bedroom, and there's a giant security camera, old school style, sticking out to watch your every move, because of course that's what we all want, right? And for some reason there's also a Roomba on the ground. I don't understand that. But you walk in, so it detects it's you. It knows what your emotional state is. It sees what you're doing. It also sees everything else in your room. It sees that you've, and this is what the speaker says to you. I noticed you have a copy of The Godfather by your bed. the movie based on this novel is showing tonight at 9:30 p.m. on Channel 5. Now that's useful, right? Because maybe that's something you really want to see. How many of the people in here, like how many of you are willing to put a giant security camera in the corner of your bedroom and just let Google see everything? Okay, that's what I thought. But guess what? Google doesn't need a camera to see you. This is the thing, while everybody's obsessing about facial recognition, we've forgotten, again, it's good to get specific, there's all kinds of developments everywhere else. MIT has a system that can detect not just motion, but emotion, and all kinds of other things about you simply by looking at how you move throughout a room with Wi-Fi. We all have all kinds of connected devices in our homes now. They don't need to have cameras in order to understand you, recognize you, make decisions about you. And the challenge with that, because they do provide good utility, is that we don't have any norms or standards around what to do with all of this data. In the United States alone, there are completely different facial recognition standards depending on where you are in the country. And that is totally different from what is acceptable use cases in GDPR-governed countries. And even within the EU, the GDPR is assigned and used and enforced in different ways. And all of this, I think, is really challenging because the way that we are being scored is intentionally opaque. Now, there are good intentions with some of this stuff, but for example, Google's third version of reCAPTCHA, which is now out, makes it a lot better as you browse the internet. Remember, like, to prove you're not a robot, you had to type in a bunch of letters, or you had to go through the stupid 3x3 grid and pick out the street signs, which is super annoying. We all hate that. So Google made it really easy by taking away all that stuff and just putting a little bit of code in to authenticate and score you. But part of the way that it scores you is, if you're logged into Google, you get a higher score. If you are doing things that mimic what a human would normally do on Google, you get a higher score. If you don't, then you get a lower score, right? And as a result of that, you're either shown the website or you're not shown the website. And Google doesn't leave. It's not like it's totally not collecting data as it goes through that entire process. It's always there, which puts some companies potentially at a competitive disadvantage, but also nobody's bothering to tell us this. So if you don't have a good score, you would have no way of knowing that you don't have a good score, and you have no way to correct that. And that's problematic because scoring as a service is a whole new thing. It's a whole new business area that's launching. One of the ways in which this connects directly to all of you is the new Neighbors app from Amazon. I know that some of you have seen this, but I want to tell you why I find this so troubling. So anybody can download the Neighbors app anywhere. You don't have to yourself have a Ring camera. For those people who do have cameras, they can connect it to this and open up the streams and be able to share it and share that video out and the photos out with others. And this is supposed to make our neighborhoods, I guess, safer. The problem with that is that I looked at this video and I've intentionally pixelated out this guy's face. This guy is currently being accused of being a thief, of stealing a bunch of stuff. Now, it's plausible that whatever he stole was somehow outside of the frame of this camera, or the camera shut off at precisely the time that he was stealing stuff. But I've watched this thing a bunch of times, and guess what? He never stole anything that I could see. It's just a guy on a camera and somebody saying something false about him. Or this one, this is another one of two little kids who are running around, and I'm somebody who has a little kid who likes to climb on things. This person is accusing these kids of trying to break in to their home. And these kids were not doing that. These kids were swinging on they were trying to turn the little, whatever, staircase into a jungle gym. The problem is that while maybe the average person can't recognize who these people are, Amazon also has something called recognition. There are tools that are specifically designed to continually scrape our faces to recognize who we are, and here's scoring that's happening. So you yourself don't have to score them, but the fact that you've got negative content attached to this person's face, backed by a company that's really good at parsing that kind of data, is a problem. And if you go to recognition, there's a whole bunch of information around how they actually do that, from real-time video to even, and this is a problem if anybody in here works for TMZ, there's a whole celebrity recognition tool section where they will lock onto a well-known person's face and follow them around. Now, maybe if you're super, super into Brad Pitt, like that's a good thing, easier to locate and identify him, bad if you're Brad Pitt. On the other hand, if you're Maria, are you in here from Rappler? She was around. If you're a journalist in an area where people want to do you harm, this is a real easy way to help them do that. Scoring matters because bias isn't being addressed. These systems that are letting people who have a lot of racial hatred inside of them create little news stories to tell other people that people who don't look like them or talk like them are doing bad things is a real good way to make sure that we divide ourselves into the future. Facebook recently launched this project. It's a challenge to try to address bias. It's a challenge set for deepfakes. There's a whole thing, this happened last week. And there's a big example of all the different universities that are taking part to try to address bias and all the different professors. And unless there is something that they chose not to publish as part of this big announcement, guess what? All the people working on this project, the ones that they are publicly touting are men. It's not a single woman that's part of this. It's funny, but it's also not. It's real bad. Deep uncertainty warrants deep questions. You just saw the next generation of user-generated content. How is that going to shape your future? Is external scoring going to impact our ability to see your content? And you'll have no control over that at some point. What does the evolution of scoring mean for programmatic advertising? Do news organizations have responsibility to help people learn and understand how they're being scored, perhaps by somebody else or by you? Is data privacy regulation and our antitrust investigations going to lead to eventually to some kind of nationalized scoring system in the United States? Should journalists, if that happens, be exempt from scoring? Should journalist scores be automatically made open to the public? This impacts you. How would a two-party notification system that we have with our phones, where in some states you have to notify both parties and others not if you're recording, how do those laws apply to things like biometric recognition and scoring? Because that's going to impact your ability to use that data. Will Walmart shopping carts be allowed to cross state lines? All right, so the key finding here was everybody alive today is being scored. I showed you a bunch of trends. And here's a summary. We're all being scored. You need to start thinking now about how these scores impact you and the work that you're doing. And again, don't just think about the next couple of days. Think about this over the trajectory of that entire cone, over the next 20 years. All right, our last key finding, Sam, why don't you come up now, because I'm running a little short on time, is that digital subscription and distribution models are permanently broken. So here we're going to talk about digital frailty, bulk messaging restrictions, all different kinds of things. And I've got Sam Guzik with me up here. So Sam helped write a big chunk of the report this year. He's one of my former graduate students at Stern and one of the smartest people that I know. And one of his findings was that the whole subscription model economy has, I'm not making sense. Stuff happened. And so I want you to tell everybody what happened.
Yeah, thank you, Amy. So one of the things that we did as part of this report was try to understand what is the potential for growth with digital subscriptions and how are we doing. So we tried to build a database of as many local newspapers as we could find using publicly available information. And so we used information from SEC filings to pull together a database of 90 different local papers to understand how many people are subscribing to them and to understand what that might tell us about the capacity to grow and the impact of these other trends on that model. And what we found as we sort of pulled together all the information is the average market penetration for a local paper is 28%. So 28% of households in the average community we're looking at are supporting their local paper. And how that number strikes you probably depends a lot about your context. So if your context is the history of newspapers, that's actually a really scary number because there was a time in the 1960s where the market penetration for newspapers was over 100%. Almost every household was subscribing to a paper, and many were subscribing to more than one. If you take it a little bit more close to home, it's a mixed bag. So Netflix has market penetration of 50%. Half of the households in the US subscribe to Netflix. If you compare it to Spotify has about 20% of the households in the US. But as we were doing this, we were also looking for other models of what could we compare this to understand how could we take our growth model and think about it. And one of the ones that really stood out was comparing us to public libraries. And this was really meant to underscore the challenge that if a public library, which is a free service, has a cap on how many people will actually subscribe, what does that mean for newspapers? And one in particular stood out, which is the St. Louis Public Library, has about 27% of the folks who are eligible for a library card have come into the library to sign up for it. And I think that really raises the question, what does that mean for the possibility for growth? To put this into context, it's helpful to think about what are some of these numbers that we're talking about with aggressive growth models. So if the LA Times were to have met its growth target of 150,000 subscribers this year, that would have been 3.5% of all the households in LA in a single year subscribing, on top of all the households that are already subscribers, and on top of all the ones that are churning out. And so I think the reason to think about this is it forces us to think about who are the people who are actually doing that signing up, and how to put it into context against the rest of this trend. So
that's right.
Hand it back to you.
Thanks, Sam.
Thanks.
Sam Guzik, everybody. Oh, Sam, well, we'll talk. We'll talk. So, thank you, Sam. Here's the deal. Your news organizations are everybody's trying to get subscriptions, everybody's got a paywall, and yes, people should pay for your work. However, everybody is now offering some kind of digital description. Now, this list is a little bit US-centric, and to be fair, it's not totally comprehensive. But you as a news organization, you're not just competing against somebody else in your local market, or if you're local, a national subscription service, you're also competing against things like Peloton, okay, the bike, the exercise bike, and you're competing against gaming services. And also you're competing in some way against the ISPs because people have to subscribe to that. And a lot of people now have their blogs and their newsletters on Substack, and they are very rightfully so asking people to pay them for that work. Or you're being asked to pay to subscribe to premium things on Medium or on, Pick a Place. And also, your local public media stations are asking for your support and to donate to them, which you should do. But here's the rub. The rub is that if you go through and categorize and look at all the different possible monthly subrates just in the United States, and this is not anywhere close to being a comprehensive list, we're talking about over $100. So the question is, there's more entering the space. What do you think the subscription ceiling is for consumers in the next 3 years? Because at some point, they're going to top out. Well, the research that we did shows that for the average family, for the average person, it looks like around $36. So if $36 is the top end of what people are going to feel okay about subscribing to, where does that put you? Is your organization going to be the one that wins out paying for that fee over somebody else? And how do you even know that? It can't just be because you're the local paper, or you're the national paper, or you're the huge big broadcast station. That cannot be the reason. What matters most to consumers? It's not just content anymore. It's also the lowest point of friction. So I'm not gonna go through this whole thing. You're gonna get it at the end. But there are lots of different things that matter to people beyond just content. Things like how buggy is your app, okay? Everybody in this room has, I know, at some point been part of a project where an app was buggy and you just kind of left it because you had other stuff on your whiteboard. You are facing the kind of scrutiny and competition now that does not allow for that going forward. How easy is it to use your product from zero to full use, et cetera, et cetera. I went through and looked over time to see what the lowest points of friction were decade by decade. And what we're starting to see is that because of all of these different shifts, those who really understand streaming, who are building out that ecosystem, are ahead. They're able to build lowest points of friction into whatever it is that they're doing, which is something for everybody to be thinking about. So what is the present and the future of your lowest points of friction? How are you going to make it compelling for people to choose you over somebody else? Because the answer is, it's not your current digital subscription model. You're all doing great work. However, you have to do different. So, deep uncertainty, as we wrap up here, warrants deep questions. What differentiates your product from all the other products that we're being asked to subscribe to? How do you make money if you can't control the data? If you how do you make money if you're not building the systems and the protocols and the networks, if somebody else is? Are we creating a future imbalance in how our communities are informed? Are we making it so that we are engineering a whole bunch of haves and have-nots? What are all the other ways that you could be generating revenue that go beyond subscriptions and events? Because I'll tell you something, love of media, love of journalism, love of news is not a sustainable business model. Now, I'm going to be going 5 minutes over. I know some of you have to run to the airport. Don't feel weird if you've got to get up and run. For those of you who can stay, you already know that this isn't the end. You know that this isn't the end because at the very beginning, I said that I would close with scenarios for ONA's next 20 years, for the next 20th anniversary of ONA in the year 2039. And those scenarios are going to be solutions. Deep uncertainty warrants deep questions, but it also warrants deeply informed actions. Incremental actions taken all the time, because failing to plan for the future is planning to fail. So here's where we're going to end. We're going to end with scenarios for the next 20 years. And I want to walk you through the future history of ONA. It will become clear to you momentarily why I'm a little teary. I want to walk you through the future history of ONA in the year 2039. This is where I think we could be. This is the preferred future. A decision was made in the year 2019 to start developing and collaborating to develop standardized labels for all of our content. The platforms complied. Eventually, as we moved from Web 2.0 to Web 3.0 to Web 5.0, everything, facts, algorithms, our biometric data, the data the reporters used, everything was recorded as part of a public ledger. It didn't mean that everybody could see everybody's business. It just meant that we had a record. We had a way to authenticate and to build trust. News organizations became more inclusive. By the year 2039, more than half of the top leadership, editors-in-chief, publishers, chief ethics officers, chief data officers, chief executive officers were people of color. And the Women's Leadership Accelerator and program that's become so popular and so sticky didn't exist anymore. It didn't need to exist because it wasn't a weird thing to see a woman as a leader. The news slowed down. It turns out that Gen Z kids grew up hating broadcast news and all of the shouting and all of the vitriol and all of the back and forth. And as adults, Gen Z demanded slower, more informed news cycles. They brought back long-form analysis. They craved depth and understanding rather than speed and little hits of dopamine. And that's good, because the world became more complex by the year 2039, and we needed people to be better informed. The news became profitable. In the year 2024, the United States government and leaders of news organizations agreed to pilot a blockchain program together. The system tracked all of the data transfers for every single bit of content that moved around, whether it was synthetic media or real, that came from a news company. And any time that packet of data in any way generated revenue from a third party, that third party had to give a cut of it back to the news organizations. This meant that the big platforms who for years had siphoned away revenue from journalism had to share it back. Every company had media futurists on staff. News organizations developed a culture of strategic foresight in their organizations. Media futurists were using tools and frameworks and data, and they were a vital part of every single management team. And at ONA in 2039, we all met up at the bar on Friday night. Rich Jaroslawski, Jim Brady, Jay McDonnell, Irving Washington, Trevor Noblich, Anthony Moore, Jen Mizugata, Ann Saul, Jody Brannon, and all the other usual suspects met up at the bar on Friday night to talk about ONA's first 20th anniversary and how far we'd come and how much brighter we thought our future was as a result. I believe you can get there by the year 2039. But we need more futurists. And so this is going to be my last one of these. That's why it's my last Tech Trends talk. And the reason for this is it's time to pass the baton. This session needs to continue, but it can't just be people popping up with what their friends think is interesting. You need to use data and to apply frameworks to figure out what the trends are and to figure out what they mean. I don't work inside of a newsroom anymore. I haven't for a very long time. So it's important that as this session continues, and it will, that the people every year doing this are those working in their newsrooms, learning to use these tools and applying these tools and giving their own perspectives, because we need more futurists. We need more of you doing this work, people who are trained. And I think I need to make space for another generation of people to do this. So I'd like to bring Sam back up. Sam does not work for me. Sam's company is nice and lets him collaborate with me on occasion. But Sam is going to take over for me next year. Sam, tell everybody what you do.
When I'm not working with you on the report, which is incredibly fun, I work for Hearst Newspapers as a product manager there. And I'm part of a team of designers and developers and engineers thinking about how do we build seamless experiences for subscribers, and how do we build tools for our journalists to actually deliver the news that they need to come together with.
So Sam is going to do this next year. Thank you, Sam. I am going to coach him on the background. He's going to do all the research. I'm just going to get him ready. He'll do it next year, and then next year he's going to hand it off to one of you. And then you're going to hand it off to somebody else. And this is a good way for us to make sure that this training and this information exists and that everybody's using it. It has been a privilege and an honor to do this for the past 12 years. I want to say thank you to everybody. A couple years ago, Matt Waite and I stood on this stage, broke a whole bunch of local and national laws, and flew drones inside of a hotel ballroom. LaToya Peterson, at some point, we put on a robot, and she drove herself onto a stage, and we had a conversation. It's been an amazing 12 years. I am not going anywhere. I'm continuing to do my work. I'm just trying to open it up and to get more of you doing this. So I want to thank you for ONA for propelling us forward. This is the link that has the report and everything else in it. Quickly take a photo, because I got to get off the stage. Hold on, I'm holding. Somebody else just tweeted out. Trevor, hello. You want me to leave?
No, I don't want to leave. You're stuck here for one more minute.
Okay.
Thank you, everyone. Let's give Amy a hand. Amy, we haven't.
Okay, I'm not wearing waterproof mascara. Stop.
Amy, none of us at ONA have slept in a month, so if you tear up, we're all gonna join you. So I just wanted to say to Amy and to all of you, Amy has done this as volunteer and in support of the community for 12 years. She's been on our board of directors. She brought in breakfast for everyone this morning. Also worth a round of applause. And she handled the logistics, so personally, thank you. And on top of that, she told us that this year would be her last year, but before I could have a heart attack, Amy said, one, I'm also going to do a workshop, so she brought that extra workshop, so hopefully a lot of people got to participate in that yesterday, and she said, I think I have an idea about how to move forward. So your service has just been commendable, and we really are going to miss you. It's going to be hard to have ONA without you.
Thank you.
And so you have a gift.
Thank you. You guys are amazing. Thank you. We all should leave. I was just going to say the usual stuff. Think exponentially. I'm done. Go to work. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Oh, sorry. Thank you so much.